Okay, I'll call this Plan Commission meeting for February 10th, 2020 to order. Roll call, please.
Chris Zellner.
Here.
Joe Zitzelberger.
Here.
Kristen Runge. Brad Zeman.
Here.
Ryan Malish.
Here.
Chris Thomas.
Here.
Brian Wallace.
Here. Okay, first item we have is minutes. Look for a motion or
Review the minutes and make the motion.
approval by Brad Zeman,
Second.
second by Chris Thomas. Any other comments? Call the question. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Public comment for any items not on the agenda for this evening. Anybody turn any forms in either? No? Okay, hearing none, I'll move forward. First item under new business, discuss and take action on a request for a site plan approval, Kramer Development LLC, mixed-use commercial, Lot 2, Woodland Crest Development.
Chris, I'd like to have the applicant make a presentation, and just to give you a sense, this is just phase one of this particular lot. So our comments, and we'll have some broader comments on the entire site, but really your approval is just for this phase one of the development, but it also gives you a sense on how the rest of the lot is going to be filled out. So with that, I would turn it over to Jeff.
Good evening, I'm Jeff Kramer with Kramer Development. Also have here with me Josh Wilcox and Dustin Dressen from GBA Architecture and Design, and Kevin Yeska with JSD. They're the civil engineer on the project. Then Margaret Blum is representing Ford Development Group. She's here as well if there's any questions for them. Some background on me, I've been in commercial real estate development since 2004. I started my own business about 7 years ago. And since then, I've been developing restaurant, retail, commercial space, office space. I've done projects in Middleton, Madison, Sun Prairie, Janesville, Stevens Point, that kind of thing. Hopefully Waunakee next. And we have an accepted offer to purchase with Ford Development Group for Lot 2. And I know you're all familiar with the overall Woodland Crest project, but Ford Development sold off Lot 1 to Hy-Vee, and Lot 2 is right across Sarah Lane. And we're looking at this as kind of a multi-phase project with 3 buildings. The overall site's about 3 acres. Phase 1 is the building at the corner, which is roughly 15,000 square feet, single-story commercial type uses. And then as we identify future tenants for the other buildings, we'll be coming back in front of you. We anticipate building 2, which is at the entrance to the project, to be 4,000 to 5,000 square feet, probably 1 or 2 tenants. And then building 3 is roughly about 10,000 square feet. As part of phase 1, not only the building we'll be constructing, but also the majority of site improvements. So we're going to, as you can see here with the darker shaded parking, build more parking than is required in phase 1, and also install the entrances off of Sarah Lane and Simon Crestway to create a through circulation, not only for our tenants, but for emergency vehicles as well. We situated the site plan as you see to activate Highway Q and Sarah Lane and create a sense of place there. Building 1, as Josh will go through the architecture, you can see that we focused on trying to activate that corner. It's going to be a very busy intersection, and we're trying to create a unique feel and create some activity there. The first building is roughly 15,000 square feet. It's designed for probably up to 9 tenants, anywhere from a little over 1,000 square feet to probably 5,000 square feet would be the maximum size. And we're identifying folks, working with folks, you know, at restaurants, service-oriented retail type things, that type of feel. I'm going to turn it to Kevin Yeska to go through some of the civil engineering components of the project, and then Josh can walk through some of the architecture. And we'll answer questions either during or after the presentation. Thanks.
Hello everyone, my name is Kevin Yeska, JSD Professional Services, the site civil engineers on the project. So as Jeff mentioned, we are looking at 94 parking stalls going in, shown hatched here in gray, with a future build out of 48 on the south side of buildings 2 and 3 for a total of 142 parking stalls is what we're projecting here. Total site impervious area, looking at 78% impervious on this site. We've been working back and forth with staff as this is part of the GDP for Woodland Crest, and actually looking at the impervious value for Lot 1, which is a high V site to the north, and our lot, and how in total those are only equaling 63% impervious. So that is keeping us below the open space requirement for the GDP, which is 70%. From a utility standpoint, we are installing, Forward Development Group will actually be installing a water main and sanitary sewer right grade back there. You can see the sanitary and water main down the middle of that access drive, and then Kramer Development would be responsible for storm sewer, which is highlighted in orange. In general, the site itself is draining to 2 separate watersheds across this lot, one of which will go to the southeast to a regional basin, and another watershed heading to the northwest to a regional basin behind High V. From a loading and access standpoint, the south side of our building will be our loading area. We've ran turn movements through our parking lot to make sure that the appropriate trucks can access that spot, and that is what this area here would be reserved for. Unloading of goods for the expected restaurant tenant. Crash enclosure located on the south side of the building with landscaping throughout the islands and building foundation. With that, I'll turn it over to GBA.
Just a second. Chris, can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
The question is, where does the stormwater go on the southern part of the lot? Does the water flow south towards those single-family residentials, or does it flow north?
Sure. So on the this parking area, yeah, right here, everything is captured in this inlet, routed through, up, over, and out to Sarah Lane. So the watershed itself was actually much of this southern parking lot is actually projected to head to the southeast to our regional basin, where this parking lot is going. What we're doing here is looking at trading off a little bit of that area, so this will actually head to the northeast, and then we're picking up this area to head to the southeast. So there will be a trade-off here in the future, which was detailed in our stormwater management plan.
So what about the stormwater on those residential lots? Will that flow north or will it flow south? Where does it do it now? Where is it currently? What direction does it flow?
I believe we're heading to the southeast with those lots. I'd have to pull up a larger grading plan and look at that.
Okay, I think maybe you could answer that
Sure.
offline or later in the meeting.
Sure.
Okay.
All right. So my understanding, Josh Wilcox with GBA, we're the architects on the project. I don't know if everybody in their packet has any of the elevations or the renderings. I don't believe it's going to be part of this. So we have the option to either hand out some hard copies for that, or,
They didn't have the
and I don't know if
elevations
we're permitted to put them on the screen or not in terms of
Hang on.
what the actual process here is.
She might
Do you have, you got a flash?
Yes, we do.
I have them in the previous, possibly.
If you get us a flash, we can put them up.
There we go. All right, so right now we're looking at building 1, and that is the only building that we have developed elevations and a design for. But overall, the theme here is to take these buildings and pull them up to the corner of the lots to create a little bit more of an urban edge. Now, between the setbacks that are required and the different utility easements, could only go so far. But by pulling all of the buildings up, not just building A, we create a little bit more of an urban edge, activate that corner, create a little bit more excitement there, and also bring the parking internal. So when you're going by on Q or Sarah, coming from Hy-Vee, you're gonna be looking at more activated storefronts and less at a parking lot. So that is the overall concept. So that's where we started with building 1 with that L-shaped. B and C, those designs will evolve, but that concept is there, again, creating that activated storefront looking out. While the actual pedestrian entrances will be on the inside of the building, the facade itself has been activated on all 4 sides with high-quality materials that are masked in different roof lines throughout the facade to kind of ground the materials in there. We go to the rendering shots. We started with the focal point on the corner. So that is where the design evolved from. So that has the highest roof line, the most activation with glass looking in at, which would be the corner tenant. As Jeff mentioned, there's 5, 6 tenant spaces in there. That would be kind of the anchor tenant, so to speak, on there with an outdoor patio space. And so what we've done is we've taken the facade, we raised that up, and then dropped the massing around it. So by alternating the massing in and out with different materials, it provided opportunities for signage above for the different tenant spaces, while still allowing for multiple areas for storefront from the outside looking in. So typical retail, obviously the entrance and all the activations coming from the parking lot. Here we're two-sided to that end. Beyond that, the material palette is pretty simple. We have essentially 3 different colors. We have a darker masonry through here that is black. It has some warmer materials in it. You can see it has a soft matted look. And then that is complemented with a thin cut stone that you see on some of the other forms. Ultimately working to a board and batten. That is something that's somewhat consistent through this part of the area. That creates some of the higher roof lines through there and brings the brighter white color to it. Now the white is something that's a little bit unique in this area. We like the idea that it's at the focal points and kind of draws your eye to it while not being overbearing. You don't look at a white colonial style building here. Rather, you're looking at the stone materials and the bricks to ground it and make it feel warm and simple. We've gone through and been consistent with the glazing throughout, so getting as tall a glazing as possible, darker window frames. We're looking at black window frames, kind of a classic treatment with the white color and with the stone through there. And that's consistent throughout, like I said. And then introducing some awnings and different architectural treatments to add a little depth and texture to the building. With that, some of the roof lines also are extended up to hide as much of the rooftop units as possible from the primary views. So we're trying to do that in lieu of doing large rooftop screening, something that you can see from a distance. That way it's just integrated into the architectural form as opposed to a add-on feature throughout there. Our max building height's gonna be around 21 feet. That may go up or down depending on what we can do to screen those rooftop units. I know it's one of the comments that came back from staff was to make sure that those are screened. And again, we're trying to integrate that into the architecture as much as possible. So with that, I think it gives you a good overview of what we're looking at here architecturally. Certainly we can talk a little bit about signage and some of the other details on there if you like, but typically those are done by third parties. Any questions?
Okay, if I could walk you through the staff comments, I think there's about 10 of them or so. We provided a handout, I think, at all of your desks. Number 1 is there was setback requirement in terms of where the parking lot is. In our ordinance requires a 5-foot setback from any of the parking lots. They've agreed to, it was 2.5, they've agreed to push that another 3.5 feet to make it the full 5-foot setback for the parking lot. Tracy, you go to the site layout. So one of the things that we've had discussion on maybe the one where it shows the utilities going through.
You're talking about setback on the property owner there?
Setback what? On the parking lot?
From the neighboring property?
Yes, right, from the neighboring property.
This one?
Yeah, what's that? Yeah, that one's good, right. So one of the things that's a requirement as part of the annexation agreement is that we have the two single-family lots that are on the corner of Q and Peaceful Valley Parkway. And long-term, we don't want those need to be served internally with sewer and water, and they need to provide internal access, so we don't have cars, turning in and out of there off of Q or the Parkway. What we've asked, and what the agreement says, is that Lot 1, which is the outlot 1, which the southern lot, which is not being proposed for development right now, is that we must resolve that cannot develop until we resolve that issue. So as part of this, we had asked them for plans to make sure that we didn't block any opportunities for us to create this access drive and as well as the sewer and water. Well, the sewer and water is being proposed to be extended now, and it goes north-south and then goes 45 down to the corner of the property just past where the dumpster is. So the sewer and water has been resolved. The access road it runs north-south, and what they proposed is that when outlot 1 is developed, that roadway be extended on a straight line down to the corner of here, Tracy says I better point, so I'll point, this is on. Is extend this road down and then come over this way connect to the property. And we've asked for 32 feet wide in terms of making proper access into that property. So that's number 2.
Ultimately is gonna own that.
Whoever owns the lots, they'll have to grant an easement to the, to the
Residents,
operators of the residential. Number 3 is that we wanted to make sure that it was transparent glass at the corner of Q and Sarah Lane, which they've agreed to, and that's a condition of approval. There was a little bit of discussion in terms of the parking count, and Kent and Jason both counted and came up with really different solutions, because they were looking at the build-out of some of the commercial areas, and regardless, they meet the requirements for phase 1. And so they'll have to meet future phases. So they have an excessive amount of parking for phase 1. So in future phases, as we go along by each phase, we'll have to count to make sure that there's adequate space for parking, which there appears to be. But because they have this X number of parking stalls that they're putting in, it requires them to add 1 additional ADA spot, which may not be an appropriate space right now, but I think as they fully build out, it'll make more sense, but it's a requirement. Number, let me get the numbers here right.
5.
5 is access easement to the residential lots, which is something that we've talked about. Number 6 is the electric utility easement. We're okay with what they're proposing in terms of having things in the easements, but we certainly want them to get approvals from whoever utilities that they're gonna be occupying, that they're okay with it. That was number 6. Number 7 is the Strand. We wanted to verify that the dumpster location, and that their trucks would be able to make the truck turning movements in order to make that pickup. Number 8 is in a condition that they shield all the rooftop mechanics. And number 9 is really it's a catch-all. It's all the other all staff comments modified to the satisfaction of the village engineer. And then Brian. So one of the things that we're not asking for is a letter of credit in order for the public utilities, because this sewer and water that's gonna serve these homes is gonna be public sewer and water that'll serve this building phase 1, the existing homes, and any future development on those lots. Anytime we have multiple users on a utility line, we require them to be in a utility easement and become public, so that we're able to properly maintain them as a public sewer and water. So rather than get a letter of credit, we are proposing to add a condition that they'll not be able to get occupancy until those sewer and water improvements are completed. And then lastly, I want to talk just a little bit about and it was touched on briefly, was this open space requirement. The ordinance in GDP had required that no more than 70% lot coverage. They are proposing a 78% lot coverage. And I think if you look at what their argument is if you look at this holistically as a development with the high V, which has a substantial amount of open space, but rather than tying them to what their space is, I think he said it was closer to that 64?
Yeah.
64% open space. So as a blended and a development, it's not gonna look overly compact, and I think we're meeting the goals of the area by limiting them to 78%. And our planners have told us that this from from a use standpoint and from an access standpoint and from circulation and the building types and the elevations all fit well together. So we're not trying to, at least in their opinion, we're not trying to overuse the land that they're proposing. And one question that I have for you, and it's a little bit of deferral on me, is that if the village engineer by the ordinance determines that this be a minor addition, then it stops here at the Plan Commission, which I would lean towards, unless there was some opposition from the Plan Commission, and then we would require us to go to the village board and get an amendment to the GDP. So I'd like some direction from the Plan Commission, if you would concur, unless there's some objection to me calling this a minor addition to the general development plan.
Yeah, I would say, and even if it goes to the village board, there's flexibility within the existing general development plan where the village board could reach a conclusion that the 78% is fine, and you don't actually have to amend the GDP. One thing that I would, depending on what your rationale is, I understand that the developer is kind of tying this back in with Lot 1 also, which is the high V lot, and if that's critical for you as you go through this analysis, the only thing I would caution you on is, we've already approved an SIP for high V lot, and there's always the possibility that they, for one reason or another, high V may need to come back to the village to seek to amend its SIP. And if part of their amendment, they essentially need to increase the amount of the impervious surface area on their lot, but still stay under, at that 70% mark. I mean, I just don't want to, if your decision tonight on Lot 2 is potentially negatively going to impact the flexibility on Lot 1 moving forward, I think that's part of a discussion that we would need to have, and we would probably need to, involve high V in that.
Yeah, at the staff level, we're not proposing that we tie those two properties together, but if you think they should, then we need to have some further discussions on it.
Okay, so I'll open it up for comments. The Plan Commissioners. Fred?
What's the status of the two single-family homes that will be adjacent to the new development? Are those staying there, or?
I think the status is that, the Tierney's bought those back when we were putting the Parkway went in terms of, allowing the room to get the Parkway built in the roadway and County Trunk Q around front. They certainly have plans long-term to develop those properties. I don't think they've put much more thought into what it's gonna look like. I know they've even had discussions with Mr. Kramer about joining it in with one of these future projects that are adjacent to this property.
Okay. So talking about this space issue, if those homes would turn into strip retail like is being proposed here, will they have that same generosity, space-wise for their lot? Kind of curious. Some concern there, because Hy-Vee's still hasn't finalized everything. Can we go back with an SIP and try to?
Well, just to be clear, they do have their SIP approved. It's just, I was raising that in case they wanted to come back and get an amendment, but Hy-Vee does have an approved SIP.
But you think that there's a potential that they may try to?
Well, I wouldn't even say it as a potential. There is, and I agree with Kevin, I think you can decide this issue on the impervious surface area for Lot 2 without necessarily tying it to the Hy-Vee lot. My only point was, if if the analysis is important to you, where you're basically grabbing impervious surface area from lot 1 to justify the decision on lot 2, I think Hy-Vee needs to be involved in that discussion, because we have separate ownership at this point. And it is theoretically possible that they could come back with an amendment to their SIP, but they do have an approved SIP at this point.
And Brian, what's their authority in terms of discretion for allowing for something over 70%?
There is discretion built into the general development plan to allow the plan commission and or the village board to provide the discretion that Kevin's talking about right now. And I do think it's significant that you have information from your planner that basically says, yes, we have a threshold, but even though the threshold may not be met in this instance, everything seems to work on this lot 2. And my understanding is all stormwater issues are, this doesn't negatively impact stormwater either. If you were to say, okay, it's okay in this particular instance to have the 78% impervious surface area as opposed to the 70%, that doesn't negatively impact stormwater, is my understanding.
Brian, any comments?
Sure. Show me that. Gotta see the dumpster.
Yeah, has there been any conversation with Hy-Vee to this point?
Not at the staff level, no. I don't know, maybe that's a question for the developer.
Potential future for this layout.
I think that's an important factor.
You can stay right there, but it's all good.
Good evening, Dan O'Callahan on behalf of Forward Development Group. We're very excited to be working with Kramer Development on this project. Our job as the master developer here is to make sure all the infrastructure is in place and to do the site planning for the entire Woodland Crest project. And part of the general development plan that we put together did call for kind of a balanced approach to the open space requirement. So we contemplated that one site or several sites might be a little bit over the standard, but there would be other sites that on balance would have excess open space, so that taken all together, the development would certainly meet that requirement. There's nothing in the Hy-Vee approval that requires that they give up any kind of capacity. Having said that, they have a fully developed plan for their site. We don't anticipate that they're going to be coming back seeking amendments. They've put everything into their site that they need to have to make their property functional. So we don't anticipate that they're going to chew into that requirement any further.
So do you see yourself, if another developer comes in and needs additional space, would you take additional percentage from the Hy-Vee site to make the equation
Well,
work for you? or-
I think as Kevin was pointing out, it's not sort of an official kind of allocation from one to the other, taking from one and giving to the other. Rather, the plan that's been approved says that on balance, the entire Woodland Crest development will satisfy or be below that threshold. So we're not formally trading credits from one lot to another. At this point, we don't have any other development concept plans. For instance, the Outlot 1 that you see there, it's to the south of this, is a blank slate. And we can plan for that site when the user comes along for that, taking into consideration the amount of development that's put on this Lot 2 that you see here, the amount of development that's already existing on the Hy-Vee lot. So we'll have the ability when we come back to the Plan Commission at that point with that site plan to show you and demonstrate that on balance, everything remains in balance.
And this is probably more for a question for you, is how long does that scenario last? 20 years from now, something changes, Hy-Vee's still there, wants to expand, something else moves in, whatever, how does that get handled? From from this requirement?
I can answer that. I mean, the GDP is the GDP, no matter who owns the property, and so the 70% requirement that's in our code is going to apply to whoever's there.
So any down the road expansion or change has to meet those requirements?
Correct.
So whether they stay in the existing footprint or change that. How
Or
does,
or you'd amend the GDP.
Yeah.
at that point in time? Chris can take care of that then. I'm gonna gather that the current calculation is only taking into account the currently proposed development areas. So The lot to the south is not in that equation at 60, whatever it was, 63% currently, or 60.
I think the 64% is just this lot and
And the
the
Hy-Vee lot.
Hy-Vee lot.
Okay. And stormwater, there's a couple of notes in there about, the site itself has been graded to handle all the stormwater for the entire property.
Right.
There was a comment in there about some drainage down to the inlet. I don't wanna touch this because I'll lose it, but down in the corner, I believe they were talking about the islands retaining water or something like that. Has that been addressed?
I don't know if I know the details on that.
Fairly, the stormwater throughout the parking lot will just enter into an inlet and into a storm sewer, and off it goes to the regional basins. I think that question was, what are the stormwater requirements for the two houses south of our lot? And those two lots are not assumed in our plat level stormwater management plan. So that developer would be responsible for on-site stormwater management.
Says here, the applicant should add a stormwater collection inlet in the east parking lot where water appears to be trapped by the proposed
Oh.
tree island.
Gotcha. Yeah, I can just point to that quick. So this parking lot here will drain across, and right here, we just have a curb opening on the backside of these islands, and that water will sheet flow through that curb, get to an inlet, and down it goes.
And I'm assuming that the pieces that are gonna remain undeveloped at this point in time will stay as as grass or whatever,
Right.
so that there's no
Right.
stormwater issues there. What about lighting on the building? Do they have to get a certain approval on the lighting? There was renderings here of the architecture. They showed lighting, significant lighting on the outside of or on the, I guess I would call it on, Q and Sarah. There seemed to be significant lighting there. What about in the lot itself or on the inside of the building? Not inside the building itself, but on the inside of the parking lot.
Right, we do have, lights proposed within a few of the islands. We do have a photometric plan, if you wanted to scroll to that, and I can speak to those.
The photometric plan takes into account the parking lot pole lighting, does not take into account any lighting on the building, from my understanding.
Right.
So we have accent lighting on Q and Sarah Lane, as you saw those kind of bell fixtures that would highlight signable areas. And then I would envision the internal side of that, we'd have some building mounted lights for decoration, and some lighting in that center area to highlight the entrance for the tenant in the corner there.
Does that have to go to staff for approval?
Yeah, that's part of the conditions that Kent included, that, catalog cutoff should be provided to confirm all lighting proposed for has full cutoff shields and project downward. So that's something that we always check as part of the final, before we issue a building permit. So all lighting would have to be, as Kent suggests, cutoff shields and project downward.
Same with the signage?
Same as the signage, yeah.
Good. Ryan?
So I don't have any questions.
Joe?
As far as signage goes, how are we within whatever limits on this? Just from the visuals, it kind of looked like a little excessive, but,
We don't have a signage plan, that'll have to come back.
okay.
It'll come back here.
Yeah.
That's fine. Chris?
Can I get a little clarity on the parking? So it sounds like the 92 stalls that's in here right now is excessive for this phase of the project, but going forward, it sounds like it's not gonna be enough, but combined it is? Is that when they start hitting the next phases of this, are we looking at combined for the whole lot?
I guess we don't know at this point, because it depends on what the uses are being proposed, and then how we count the net usable space. So, without having more detail for phase 2 and 3, it's hard to really say if it will. The bottom line is they'll have to meet the parking requirements, or they'll have to request for a waiver. But at this point, we can't, if it's a restaurant, it's X amount of parking, per seating. If it's office or retail, it's 1 per 200 square feet of the net. To actually, just to look at a box, it's really hard to tell what, unless you just count the gross, if it's gonna meet it or not. And I think the way Jason countered it, it met, and the way Kent countered it because he looked at the gross, because he didn't have the details to go along with it, said it didn't meet. So I think that Jason's closer to the answer, assuming that it's gonna be built out with some, net interior, but you're not making a decision on that. That's the bottom line, is you're not making a decision on the parking requirements tonight. You're only making approval of the parking for phase one, and it exceeds the parking that's necessary for phase one.
In any future development.
We'll have to meet.
Be assessed.
Yeah, have to meet or, request the waiver and be able to justify it.
If I could elaborate there too, when we look at parking for this type of project, we looked at a couple different things. One, gross area, and try to maintain a ratio that was acceptable for commercial space. And I think it's very close to meeting the code, so I don't remember which consultant had mentioned if it was if the buildings were all built and the parking was laid out as it is, we might be 4 short if you took the gross building area. But as Kevin alluded to, a kitchen doesn't take parking into account for a restaurant as an example. They look at seats or customer area. So if you take some of that into account, I think we'll actually probably be exceeding the parking requirement of the village. But as Kevin mentioned, we won't know that until the last building comes through.
When we did the, down by, Lawson's there with the businesses coming in there, we took away that right turn in, right?
Yes. The quick trip?
Yeah, but that was
Yeah.
how close to the intersection? You recall?
A couple hundred feet, like 200 feet.
How does this?
No, that's always been part of the plan, so that's acceptable. I mean, I don't know what the distance is, but we did, an engineer, not someone at Kent's office, actually, the transportation engineer, felt comfortable with this location and the amount of queuing that's gonna be up, that it will not cause problems at the intersection.
So, a couple questions for me. The white part, which is different than anywhere else in that corridor, do we see any problems, or do they comment on that at all? Does it match? Does it fit? Does it
Yeah,
matter for us to talk about
Just
it?
say that, we did have Ed take a close look at it, and he was comfortable with it, and he thought it was a high-quality building and that it fit well.
So the
So I think
lighting
we're
on,
deferring to him.
I just know lighting on white is a lot more visually popping at night, which is probably what the concept is they want that, fair to say. I just wanted to make sure it fits the whole area there. If it's the only building with that, I don't want it to stand out. Next is trees, foliage. I saw a little bit in the pictures. Are we meeting our standards with that?
They'd be required to meet our point system, so yes, they've got to meet or exceed our point system.
I just think the more we have from that perspective in that area, the better. Same thing with Hy-Vee, as far as just making sure that it doesn't look like a bunch of parking lots over there. I think they've done a nice job of shielding the way the building
We have
will sit
standards,
there.
so our standards are similar to other communities, are greater than some communities. It's very similar to City of Madison and City of Middleton in terms of the points, and it gives points based on the foliage coverage, it gives points based on the diameter of the trees, so it's pretty specific in terms of what they need to meet for the landscaping requirements.
And based on how little grass area is gonna be over there, it's gonna mostly be,
Point well taken. So, and maybe that's a requirement, if you're allowing this to go to 78%, that they add additional landscaping.
yeah, and that's my biggest concern, is how that water's gonna flow. Is there any areas that can dull it a little bit before it gets rushing through? So that's just a concern I have.
One of the things to keep in mind, of which we don't do a good job of showing here, off of Q, I think there's a 30-foot setback that'll all be grass. And then in the building areas and along the building, we've screened the foundations and we've met all the points with respect to canopy trees for the parking lots and things like that. There isn't much grass inside the property, but I think we don't do a good job of depicting that along Highway Q because of the setbacks that are required there.
Nope, nope. He's gotta go. I gotta go.
Oh. I'm sitting here going, why are you looking at me like that?
Saying goodbye.
Within that. So really, that's what it comes down to for me. If we're gonna open it up and give a little bit more there, I
Okay.
wanna make sure that we have,
And do we have any objection to that?
What was the,
Additional landscaping?
is there an area you're thinking about?
somewhere within on the backside. There really doesn't seem to be much in the way of anything back on that side.
Tracy, would you mind pulling up the landscape plan?
It's page 22.
Is that good, or do you wanna?
No,
the
the
actual-
actual- the actual.
On page 22 of what was on our systems here as a landscape plan.
I don't know that that's gonna help, it's kind of technical, but. This is my page 22, that doesn't look like a landscape plan. That is 24.
PDF page 24.
Yes.
So, along the queue, we've got grass through here, and carrying all the way up. And you can see along that patio, we really landscape that with plants that'll probably stick up 4 feet. So if you're sitting at the patio, you have some screening, but not covering the whole building. And then all the islands, we've got a lot of plantings in. I'm not sure where else we could really put more landscaping, given the fact that we've got the setbacks and easements for utilities. So we already have some landscaping in the electrical easement. And we mentioned we'd work with the utility provider on that to make sure that everyone's on the same understanding there. But there's not a lot of other options for that. And I think one of the things to mention too with respect to the open space, if we were developing this site and it wasn't part of overall GDP, we would have on-site stormwater, which that would boost your open space. In this case, it's all being treated off-site, so it brings us down, but the developable area and how this will kind of function and feel, I don't think will be much different than others. So if we had to put those bioretention basins in, you'd see that percentage go up. And we might lose some building area because of that, but given how this was all planned with the GDP, I think someone's mentioned that too, it seems to fit in and feel right.
What is the largest island there that kind of separates the two phases? Is that just a standalone island, or is that retaining some water there?
Where are you referring to?
The island directly, that, that's right, yes.
That's not gonna retain any water. There's a stormwater pipe that runs underneath that, and then there's landscaping that goes through that on top.
And you keep on mentioning the corner patio, probably restaurant. You have big trucks or semis, beverage trucks coming in. Where do they unload while people are parking?
Yeah.
How does that work?
That's a good question. With this type of layout, the downside is deliveries for any tenant. So I've got 4 or 5 buildings like this, and they, most of those times those deliveries come early in the morning when there's really little activity here. Most of the tenants won't open until 9 or later in this kind of scenario. For a restaurant, like in that corner as an example, you're gonna see trucks come into the parking lot internal, and they'll come through the front doors with all their material. That's the downside of putting it up against the street.
So my biggest concern
You
really
know, I think, okay, go ahead, sorry.
is just as the flow, and I heard you and listened to you where the water's gonna go. My concern though is south. Always is it gonna flow down, into the other zones, and is the capacities, and I'll leave it to the expert engineers to tell me that that's going to be the way it is, but that's just my concern when you have really very little to stop it.
I don't think I got an answer yet, so I wanted to, maybe we can circle back to that question. I think he's had time to look at, to figure out the answer. How does the stormwater interact between this property and then the property to the south? I think that we need to understand that, and maybe you can give us an answer now.
Sure, yeah, I mean, all of our site stormwater is contained on our site, exiting either to the southeast to a regional basin or heading up to the northwest. So we're really not affecting the 2 parcels to the south or all lot 1. Outside of the minimal lawn area on the south property line that may drain onto outlot 1, everything's contained on our site, so.
So maybe where I'm going with it, is where we have the parkway to the very south. If we have so much massing of parking and pavement, that coming at that speed, if that flow is heavy, down, everything flows south. Westport talks to us all the time about our water coming their direction. I just don't want this to be an overabundance of that. And from an engineering standpoint, are we good with that right now?
Yeah, it
And
hasn't
that's what
been
I'm asking.
flagged, and
It's not
so,
necessarily
yeah.
that, I'm not, I think everything looks great, but I'm just wanting to make sure that we don't have a water issue.
Those regional detention basins are designed to dissipate energy and take out the heat from that water. Also then go to a separate system, infiltrate as much as we can, and outflow in a very large storm event, you know. But yeah, it is always our goal as engineers to recharge the groundwater, infiltrate what we can, and take the heat out of that water as well, because the parking lot in the summer is hot, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, we have expert engineers, not myself, that have modeled this entire system and has been approved at the plat level with staff's reviews, so we are confident with this design.
Chris, what I'd add is that Mark Schubach, who's the stormwater guru over at Strand, has, added to Kent, and I know Kent had, this is not Kent's wording, this is actually from Mark, is that the proposed local site plan appears to conform with the overall stormwater management plan that was approved for the Woodland Crest development. So we have Mark Schubach, who does look at this in great detail, saying that it does conform with the standards that were in place for the overall development. I think that's the best answer I can give you.
I love your response, but I hate it when somebody says appears.
The what?
Appears to. That's not a,
I
yes,
know,
this will.
it's like, I don't like
Appears
that
to,
word
that's,
either, but, they're engineers, they always wanna wiggle their way out of something.
It would help as well, this site was originally proposed to have 80% impervious on it, we're at 78. So our stormwater is over-designed to what we're proposing here for this site alone at the plat and regional level.
Going back to that 78%, 70% lot coverage, while I'm sitting here and really hadn't really thought about and I think Jeff made it clear, something I don't think that we really took into consideration, is that this is being serviced by regional stormwater facilities. And so when you incorporate those regional stormwater facilities into the lot coverage, you're more than likely at that 70%. So, and that's really the intention, was to look at this as an overall development, not necessarily by lot, because those green spaces that are creating for this overall development should really be calculated into that.
I'm fine with that, the way you've explained it and the way it's been talked about here tonight. The one concern I have, and this is gonna fall back on staff, is to make sure that going forward on any other future development, that somebody doesn't point to this single lot
Yeah.
and say, why can't I do that?
Right.
Because, and, obviously, from my perspective, the response is, because it's not just that single lot, it's the entire property was developed for this perspective. So, depending on what happens with.
Well taken, and I'll formulate a reply to that, and be able to nail that question down in terms of using the stormwater for the other regional facilities.
Do we know, with the way this was developed from the entire site with the pond, because I know there's that pond down on the far southeast corner, was the properties that the Tierneys have included in that calculation, or is that standalone separate, that they would have to do their own stormwater?
Typically,
If
that
some-
would,
whatever might
yeah,
happen.
that would be standalone, or there'd be some negotiations in terms of, the water can go there, but they'll have to, accommodate for their own change in use and accommodate the stormwater. So, and not that they couldn't, work with their neighbor to provide some, enlarging one of the ponds in order to accommodate.
But they would have to do
Otherwise, they
something
had to do
with
something
the
on their own
existing, because the
site,
ponds
right.
are sized according to this current property.
Any other comments?
Yeah, could we go back and look at the, whatever drawing showed where the parking lot was shifted north by the 3.5 feet?
I'd say 19, but that's the wrong page.
No?
What, 20?
Not that one. I think it was in that same packet, though.
Okay, going back.
There was an exhibit to that, response I sent that showed it.
Yeah, in your letter.
Yeah.
That's it. Can you bring up this Kramer letter?
Is that in the?
It's changed, so, I mean, it's on this sheet, right, Jeff?
Sorry?
It's on this, or can't you see that?
That sheet.
It would have been a black and white plan with a red overlay.
Yep. I think I'm
There you
getting
go.
there. Is that doesn't show that.
Page
I don't think I have that in this packet.
If you go back to
No.
your file, I saw a PDF that might be in there.
Um,
Do you have the additional drawings where it says lot 2 would request additional drawings?
This is my file. Are you talking your file?
No,
No, I think it's just going to your subdirectory.
And this is the additional
oh, it's not-
drawings that you guys gave me on the jump drive. Is it on here?
No. There's an attachment to the email I sent
Right.
to Kevin. I can explain it, or Kevin can explain it if you want.
Can you go to the email?
Let me see if I have the email in here.
Is your question how we achieve that, or?
Yeah, basically what was condensed in order to get
Yeah.
there.
If you go just to one of the site plans that show
The colored one is fine.
not that one,
Not that one?
it's one of the engineering plans.
Bouncing back and forth here. Sorry, bear with me. Go up there.
So on the south end of the first building, we were showing a sidewalk along the whole south end. Doesn't connect anything. So, what we did was we took that sidewalk out, but left, an area for loading for that tenant there.
Okay.
And then that allowed us to shift the parking lot to the north to achieve that 5-foot, requirement off the property line. What we proposed may have sounded odd, but our thought was, when this property developed, there's probably going to be another strip added to that, that will get you another 6 feet. But obviously, we can't guarantee what happens there. That was kind of the initial thought, is you'd have an island separating those two properties. But we understand the point that was made by staff, and so it's an easy way to achieve that now. Sure.
Any other questions? Okay, Kevin, do you have any other comments before we wrap?
Just, I would add some conditions after number 9. Number 10 would be the no occupancy until the sewer and water improvements are completed. Number 11, unless I hear objection, the engineer would determine that this is a minor. We conclude this is a minor amendment and only need plan commission approval. Number 12, additional landscaping be added to compensate for the 78% coverage. And then Brian's is for me to really prepare a statement in regard to the 78% and the justification for it.
So I'll just say the landscaping one, Kevin, who's gonna approve that? Is that gonna come back here, is that gonna,
That would generally be Jason or Ed.
okay, so they would be the ones that would approve,
Yeah.
so, okay.
I don't, you're gonna, the way I wrote it, you're giving us some pretty good discretion in terms of what we're adding. If you wanna put some parameters on there, you could.
No, if they,
But I understand your point, and then we'll follow through with it.
okay, so,
Does number 9 include the concern about truck space for, the trash there?
Yeah, that was included, yeah.
Okay.
okay, any other comments?
When you talk about impervious, so like if there was not that we wanna go down that road, but like impervious pavement would pull that back down then to closer to 70? Like if they put a impervious pavement section in or
Yeah,
something?
I'm thinking that we're gonna see what the allocation is for the regional stormwater facilities for these sites and see how close it gets us to that 70.
To do something like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm gonna make the motion to approve as subject to the following conditions of satisfaction of the village engineer. So numbers 1 through 13 that Kevin just mentioned.
Second.
Second by Brian Wallace. Any other comments? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay. So we have 5 yes, 1 no. Motion carried. Next, you have update on Westport Waunakee Joint Plan Commission items for action. So we just talked about number 1. So number 2, it's initial consultation rezone county R1 to village R1 to adjust rear setback for addition Udo, 6901 Imperial Drive, Town of Westport.
Yeah, I'm trying to get there, but there's no objection for me on this one. What is it?
To the back of the house.
Yeah, Tom provided the memo in the packet. Generally says the owner wants to add on to the back of their lot, and the zoning wouldn't allow it, but the village zoning would, so they're changing from county R1 to village R1.
Anybody have any strong feelings, or leave it to Westport? Leave it to Westport? Leave it to Westport? Okay, leave it to Westport. And then number 3, initial consultation, land division rezone, Apparella, 5531 Sunset Trail.
Yeah, let's just see what Tom says, that the owner of the property along Sunset would like to split their lot in half. This would make their lot consistent with the size of almost all the lots up and down. They have other splits, it's the same size as the corresponding bookend lots at the south end of, so like it's pretty consistent with what is out there within the neighborhood. It's just a consultation, so they won't be taking any action on it. But I think Tom gives some general guidelines in terms of zoning it to R1, but it would be generally in cadence or character of what is out there now. And I don't think it has any, impact on the village.
Same thing then. Leave it to Westport. Okay. We only need one more last. Who's got it?
Motion to adjourn?
Motion by Brian to adjourn,
Second.
second by Joe. Call the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you.
Thank you.